no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by his hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank.
Hear these words from the Gospel of John. Listen for the word of the Lord. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in, because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes. He was naked and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the 3rd time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. After this, he said to him, "Follow me." Let us pray. Faithful God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. God, our rock and our Redeemer. By now, I think that word has pretty well gotten around, more or less, that a few weeks ago I celebrated the release, the publishing of my first book. And this was a very exciting moment. This was one of those top of the bucket list sorts of things that I had always wanted to do, and that first moment of holding a copy in my hand, that was it. I was so incredibly happy at that moment. This had finally, after so many months of writing and editing and contacts back and forth and more editing, finally I had this finished product in my hand. And I was excited to read a physical copy rather than on a computer screen, and so I set out to do so, and little by little, as I read, I found things I wished I could change. After the process is all done, of course, there's no going back at this point. There's no going back to the editor. Hey, can you reprint this? Just change this, and this. It's no big deal, I'm sure. But please, can you go back? I'm not telling you anything about where these things are. You'll have to see them for yourself. If you can find them, please don't. But nevertheless, I was just thinking to myself, finally, this has happened, and now people are going to maybe see these things for themselves and just think, why did I bother? That I'll somehow be found out. They'll be found out for who I really am. And there's a term for this that has popped up the past few years. Imposter syndrome. The notion of imposter syndrome is that no matter how much knowledge you seem to exhibit, no matter how much hands-on expertise you are able to show, that eventually people are going to figure out that maybe you don't know as much as you seem to. And then at that point, whenever that happens, it's all just going to come crumbling down. People are going to finally figure it out, you're not as smart as you seem to be. Imposter syndrome, that worry that you are going to be exposed somehow. And we perhaps deal with this on a more personal level. We worry that we're going to eventually come to the end of our knowledge about something, or the end of our knowledge of craftsmanship, or there are certain other things that we don't like about ourselves. We're aware of every single mistake we have ever made. We're aware of every single flaw or shortcoming that we have, and we try our best to cover those up as much as we can, hoping we'll never be found out. We will never be discovered for who we really are. And all we can focus on because of that are those flaws and those shortcomings and those mistakes. We can do this as a church as well. Certainly all the time, looking only at our limitations. And we focus only on what we don't have or we wish we had, the lack of resources rather than the resources that we do have. We do this whenever we say, well, that was a nice program we just had, but only this many people showed up. We do this all the time in so many different ways, both personally and as a community, only focusing on those flaws, only focusing on those things about ourselves we wish could be better. We wish could be improved. All of those imperfections that seem so much bigger to us than they might be to others. Peter and Jesus are talking on a beach. And before they get to this point, Peter has decided he's going fishing. He's going to go back to what he knew before this entire journey of discipleship and following Jesus ever started. It's been a pretty full couple of days. First there was starting with the last meal in the upper room, and then the betrayal, and Peter personally his own actions of denying Jesus 3 different times, and then the trial and the death, and then the resurrection. That's a lot to take in just a couple of days. That is a lot to process. That's a pretty full slate of events. And so Peter, even after he has experienced for himself the risen Christ, decides, I gotta get out of here for just a little bit. I'm going out on a boat. And there are some other disciples present, and maybe they're reacting to some of this the same way, and they decide, you know what, we better come too. And so they're out on this boat, they're out there all night long. They got nothing. Nothing to show for their efforts, nothing to show for their hard work. And then just after daybreak, there's this figure on the beach. He calls out to them. He gives them just a little bit of advice. Hey, throw your nets over this side. And they go ahead, they go along with it. Why not? What's the worst that can happen? And then the net is too full. They can't bring themselves to pull it in. There's threatening that it might break. And there is this unnamed disciple in John. We only know this disciple as the one whom Jesus loved. This disciple is the first one to recognize that this is Jesus on the shore. And the disciple shares it, shares this news, shares this recognition. It's the Lord. And Peter doesn't hesitate. Peter throws on some clothes. He immediately jumps into the water, leaving the others to deal with the breaking net and the boat and everything else. And eventually they make it to shore as well. And Jesus has a fire going, and he invites them to a meal. Just like he has so many times. And they sit down, and there's this silence that seems to hang over this breakfast. They know it's Jesus. They don't want to ask. It's all still kind of weird and new and surreal. So Jesus is the one who breaks the silence. He turns to Peter. He says, Simon, do you love me? Peter says, yeah, of course, you know I love you. Feed my lambs. A second time, Jesus follows this up with the exact same question. Simon, do you love me? And again, Peter says, yes, you know that I love you. And again, Jesus answers, tend my sheep. And one final time, Jesus asks, Simon, do you love me? And by the third time, Peter's feeling kind of hurt about this whole thing. Yes, you know everything. I've answered this question twice already. You know that I love you. And again, Jesus answers, feed my sheep. There was this cloud, perhaps, that was hanging over Peter due to those 3 denials earlier in the story, before he knew that this was going to result from what had happened. Back when Peter even denied that he even knew who Jesus was, let alone that he hung out with him. And here he is being asked, Jesus is kind of flipping the script a little bit, asking 3 different times, do you love me? That's deeper than just knowing. That is, do you love me? Peter 3 times, yes. You know that I love you. This mistake, this incredible this incredible cloud that Peter is dealing with, that he has been wrestling with, that has been churning within him, that perhaps only cut deeper with that first appearance of the risen Christ after the fact. This imperfection. And now Jesus gives him this moment, a moment of reckoning, a moment of reconciliation, a moment where he is able to make things right again. It is through God's power of love, God's power of forgiveness and presence, that is possible. There are three different components to this exchange between Jesus and Peter. Sure, there are the three different times that Jesus asks, "Do you love me?" But there are three parts to each of those little segments of the conversation. First, there is the question, and then there's the affirmation, and then there's the commission. First, there is the question, "Do you love me?" And this question comes without any kind of prerequisite. It doesn't come with any kind of precondition. It doesn't require an apology first. It doesn't require any of that. It's just a simple yes or no. "Simon, do you love me?" And then comes the affirmation. Then comes the moment where Peter has the opportunity to verbalize his answer for himself. He is not forced. He is not coerced. He is able to say for himself, "Yes. Yes, you know that I love you." And then comes the commission. "Feed my sheep. Tend my sheep. Feed my lambs. If you love me, I have something for you to do. I have a way for you to show this love to others. I have this calling for you that naturally flows out of my love for you." And again, this doesn't come with any kind of condition. It doesn't come with any kind of qualification. Peter doesn't have to prove himself first. He just needs to go. To go and to do. Empowered by this same love and forgiveness that has first been shown to him. There's this other ancient Christian writing called the Didache. It's about as old as some of the texts that we have in the New Testament, but for one reason or another it wasn't chosen to be included. And the Didache is just this series of teachings and of practices. The early church was still putting itself together, still trying to figure itself out and what works best and what made them distinct in their identity and in their sense of community. And one of my favorite lines from the Didache, there's two parts. There's two parts to it. The first part is, "If you are able to bear the entire yoke of the Lord, you will be perfect." If you are able to bear the entire yoke of the Lord, you will be perfect. That sounds like something to aspire to. That sounds like something to strive for, to always work on, and how wonderful if we ever attained that, to attain perfection. What a wonderful thing that would be. If you are able to bear the entire yoke of the Lord, you will be perfect. That's the first part. The second part is, if you're not able, at least do what you can. If you're not able to live up to this, at least do what you can. At least try. At least strive to do whatever it is that is within your power, whatever is within the gifts that you have been given. At least do what you can. There's something that the early church recognized, those earliest disciples recognized, even Jesus recognized, that any community that is made up of human beings is not going to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And so, They recognized that imperfection, the fear of imperfection, the fear of messing up in some way, can be quite paralyzing. The fear of being found out can be paralyzing, can keep us from trying at all, can keep us from doing anything. At least do what you can. At least do something. At least begin to follow the call, empowered by that love and forgiveness that God has first shown to us. God's love is the answer for people of faith to imposter syndrome. Where Jesus first asked, "Do you love me?" giving us a chance to answer, giving us a chance to respond, and then from there, Jesus says, then go. Go and take care of my sheep. At least do what you can. Feed my sheep. Because they need it. They need something. And so do you. Amen.